Moved by Marty, second by Mel. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Agenda has passed. We have one item. Jeff and Cindy Kroll request a noise permit for July 6th. Any comments, questions? I believe this is at the lake. And time frame from 8 p.m. to 12:15 a.m. 1 North Harmon Drive. Questions? Comments? I believe we did this last year also, or in a previous year. Any complaints from any of the previous time?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Yep.
I haven't got my invite yet, Jeff. But
Mel told me I couldn't dance last year, so I proved him wrong.
I'll move to approve. Second.
Okay. Motion and second. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Motion carried. Your motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mel, second by Marty. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 6:03.
Call the Traffic Commission meeting to order. Committee members are Jeff Smith, Dan Allen, Steve Rice, Kevin McCardle. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion and a second. Any additions or corrections? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. First item in new business. Mitchell Area Development Corporation requests a change of signage in the public parking lot behind the chamber. There are currently 4 30-minute parking spaces Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's requested that one of the restricted parking signs be removed completely, and the other 3 restricted parking signs be changed from 30 minutes to 1 hour parking Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And they do have this, they're in agreement with the clinic right there also for this change.
So this just matches up with actual use that they're seeing to a better degree?
I believe so.
I'm not on the committee, and I don't have a particular comment about this, but one of the last shots that people have been able to take, and that may happen today, and the question for a future traffic commission is, why do we make cars get off at Main Street after 1 o'clock? Doesn't that encourage drunk driving? And I said, well, I don't know. I've got one meeting left. I'll bring it up, and they can deal with it at another time.
It's not 1, it's 3 a.m. they have to be off.
I think the point is the same.
But it's after the bars close, and it's for street cleaning. The street sweepers go through at night, and that's the only time to totally get it curb to curb swept. That's the idea behind it.
Okay. Back. Lori, do you have?
I think the idea is so that they can utilize more of the parking.
Right. So, I mean, we started with 4. We're going to go to 3, and we started at a half an hour, and we'll go to an hour. That better fits the actual use that's
Yes.
taking place there.
Yep.
Right now, they're not getting utilized hardly at all. I mean, this is empty parking spots when the parking lot's full.
People don't think they can get to the Corn Palace and back out in 30 minutes.
Or to the clinic
Or to
in
the
30
clinic.
minutes.
In 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion from the committee or the public? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. Thank you. Corn Palace Festival Committee is requesting the following streets and parking lot closures for Corn Palace Festival. North Main Street and half block each direction from 1st to 7th on Tuesday, August 21st at 4:30 a.m. to Monday, August 27th at 4:30 a.m. Closure of the west half of the City Hall parking lot from 4:30 a.m. on Tuesday, August 21st to 4:30 a.m. on Monday, August 27th. Closure of the 5th and Main parking lot on Tuesday, August 21st at 4:30 a.m. to Monday, August 27th at noon. Closure of the northwest parking lot on Tuesday, August 21st at 4:30 a.m. to Monday, August 27th at noon. And also allowing overnight camping in the disco lot, 800 block of North Lawler, for Carnival Company workers. And it's also requested to block the half a block east on the 100 block, or from Main and 3rd Main from 3:30 p.m. Monday, August 20th to 12 noon on Monday, August 27th for Gold Star Amusement Box Office administrative offices. Same thing we've done every year.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. Next, request from Susan Galpin for a no parking zone in front of her house, right at the mailboxes, located at 1529 Country Drive, due to an ongoing issue of a resident parking in front of her mailboxes, and she's been unable to receive mail and packages from time to time. I believe Susan is present here. If you have anything further or any questions for her, she's available. Any questions for her?
Maybe I've got one for you, Lyndon, to start off. Do we have any type of an ordinance as far as
Blocking a
front of
mailbox?
posts? Yeah, mailbox.
No.
Okay, and there isn't anything federal
Nope.
or guidelines or anything? Okay.
No, if it's blocked, they just don't deliver it, and then it's the landowner's responsibility to drive to the post office and pick up your mail.
But there is an ordinance for 28 feet, isn't there?
Yes, you can't have a truck or semi anything longer than 28 feet on a city street, unless you're loading or unloading. Now, I did talk to the neighbor. I don't know if he's here. He did indicate this will not happen anymore. So I don't know if you anything you want to address with this, or you can come up here and just state your name.
Everybody, Casey Paul. I live at 1525, which is actually right next door. And the two mailboxes there is, of course, Susan's and then myself's. I do park there during the date, and I think they had the dates posted on one of those pictures. Right? Okay. Yep, so that Friday, like I said, usually there's an empty lot that's directly to the north of us, and I usually park my truck and trailer there. And my neighbors can attest to that. I do realize that sometimes I do, and like this instance here, I had a rush home coming off Omen Street. That's the quickest way there. For medical reasons, I had to run my wife to the hospital. That's the reason why I was parked there. Saturday, I did not get around to moving it. I do understand that. But this is not an ongoing issue. And personally, to be wasting taxpayers' dollars to paint a curb and put a no parking sign, if that's the case, then I feel like every single mailbox in town should have that. I see it all the time when I'm working, people not getting the mail delivered because they're parking in front of the mailboxes. So if this is an issue, it shouldn't just be one resident that we should be catering to. This should be everybody then, if we're going to be doing this. But I do apologize. Obviously, I do park in the empty lot across from my way. If I do have that, I do realize the 28-foot rule. Sometimes, like I said, when I get done real late at night, I just pull the truck in because I know I'm going to be using the trailer right away in the morning. So instead of running all the way to my shop hooking up, I leave it on there. So for that, I do realize, and like I said, I just actually found that out today when I was talking to Lyndon. So that's what I have to say.
So Casey, you're going to take care of the problem. You're not going to park there. You're going to be good neighbors and
Yes, sir.
move on.
Across the street. Yep.
Perfect.
Any other questions?
Did you have a comment, or did
This
you want
has been ongoing. This happened, we moved there in May of 2017. We kept getting nasty notes from the post office saying that please don't block the mailbox, and I let them know it wasn't us. It stopped for a while. It did. But now it has started again. So this is why I've come here. Because the truck was parked there from Wednesday to Monday morning. Constant. Okay? I didn't get my mail at all that week. I didn't get a package that was supposed to be delivered. I just got that package today. So we tried to be the friendly neighbors, but it's become a problem. If I can't get my mail, I think that should be a law. I mean, that's keeping me from getting my bills, keeping me from paying my bills, or, therefore. So that's where I'm at.
Could I speak again, please, on behalf of the comment?
Does your truck block your own mailbox?
Yes, it does. My own mailbox also. And for this Wednesday, it was not parked there Wednesday over the day. This started Friday. If it was parked there, I used my truck for work. That means that I was not working throughout the day. which.
Right, but you understand that it's not appropriate anytime.
Yes, I do understand that, sir. Yes, I do. Yep, and like I said, Friday was an incident where I did do that. And sometimes if I'm coming home for lunch and if I block that, our mail lady, you know, sometimes it gets delivered 11 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So as far as judging what time my mail ladies, are we not supposed to park there in front of any mailboxes during the whole entire day? I mean, that's kind of what I'm coming off of. But as far as the statement goes from Wednesday to Monday, that is very inaccurate. I was there Friday and Saturday and Sunday. I moved it Monday morning when I took my kid to school.
Well, I delivered mail in the 70s.
Yep.
And, you know, you have the sub, you have got a guy on vacation, so that may explain the variations in time.
Yes.
I had a situation like this, and I just stopped delivering the other guy's mail, and I lost it at the post office for 2 weeks, and then it didn't happen again.
That's not good. No. But
Well, I mean, if you want to get your mail, you should move the truck.
no, I understand.
And it shouldn't be incumbent upon her to rent a P.O. box or to go down to the post office or miss it on Saturday, and then if there's a holiday on Monday. I really feel like you're not taking this very seriously.
But I am, sir. This is what I'm saying. Like, and I've had one phone call actually from our neighbors, one, and a message, and I have a message saved on my phone. It's the only time I've ever been approached about this issue.
You know, I'm going off the council, but if I were on the council, I wouldn't be in favor of painting the curb. I agree with that. I'd be in favor of towing.
Okay. And I would agree with you.
And then we can keep the truck, and if it's over the weekend and it costs you a day of work, it costs you a day of work because you couldn't park it someplace else.
I agree.
Maybe that's what we should do.
Okay. I agree with you.
Anybody else?
Somebody
in the
else
public?
want?
Go ahead. State your name.
Thank you. Amber Goldhammer. I live at 1521 Country Drive, which is on the east side of where Casey lives. There are 3 mailboxes parked in front of my house. I've never, ever had an issue with Casey parking in front of our mailboxes and us not being able to get our mail. I can also attest that on times when he has had his trailer and truck, that it has been parked in the lot on the north side of the road. And if we're talking about painting curbs, I would oppose that because I think if they're going to paint his, then you need to paint them all. And I run a business out of my home. And then I'm worrying about parking for my families. And so I would oppose that if that was going to take place. I just think that this probably could have been handled differently. And like I said, he doesn't always park. Even if he has a trailer parked or attached to his truck and he parks in front of my mailboxes, I've never, ever had an issue getting my mail. So I think it was just a one-time thing that wasn't taken care of.
It doesn't sound like it's a one-time thing. The mailboxes that you have, are they part of theirs? I mean,
no, they are separate. But his property butts up to the edge of our mailbox, and then we have a area of driveway, and then it's our property. But there are times that he parks up to our mailboxes, and I also agree, like, mail comes at all times of the day, so how are we supposed to know if the mail's coming at 11 or 2, and then we can't park on the road ever because of that? I mean, that happens all over town, so I just think it's, I think it's just crazy, honestly. So.
Okay. Anybody else care to address this? Come forward and state your just come forward and state your name.
My name is Josh Moore. I also live at 1529 Country Drive. What she said was that he parks in front of their mailbox. Why don't they do that all the time? Just if they don't want their mail delivered, I think they should park up there. Why should they park in front of mine and have us not get our mail? So that's all I have to say.
So Casey, you're committed at this point of trying in your best effort to try to park off-road into the empty lot moving forward, and now that you're made aware of this, you're gonna try as best you can or 100% of the time to not block posts. the mailbox.
Yes, sir. I don't want unhappy neighbors.
Okay,
Neighbors are.
I will motion to deny the request. And then if
Deny
there's
or
a
table for a month? See if we get repeat.
Oh, we can do that. Yeah.
I mean, if you want to monitor it for a month or
Yeah, let's do
two,
that. Yeah, I'll table it
That's
and
one
you
of the things
guys,
we've done before. Okay?
you can pass any information on to Lyndon if you'd like, and then we'll bring it up again a month from now.
And
That's
the
my motion.
July meeting?
Second July meeting.
Yeah, whatever the
It'd be the
next.
second July meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion to table until the Traffic Commission meeting in July.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion?
Jeff and I were talking, I just want to add this, and we had the question about whether there's any legality of parking in front of mailboxes. And I've said before, I live by Patton Young Park, and during the summertime, if I count, there's 12 Saturdays, roughly. Probably half of the Saturdays, I don't get any mail because there's an event that is scheduled at Patton Young Park, and the people all park in front of all the houses up and down that street in front of the mailboxes. And I've seen it happen that people delivering mail, they drive up and kind of look and go up and take a U-turn and just don't deliver the mail that day. So, I mean, it happens, quite a bit. And I live by a city park, and it's a city-sponsored event or somebody renting a city facility, and people park in front of the mailboxes. And if we can't solve the getting along from the neighbor standpoint, there are literally probably hundreds of mailboxes that get parked in front of, and I don't know how we would try and address them other than paint all the curbs and have no parking. But I just don't see that as a reasonable option.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Will be adjourned. 6:18.
Do we have someone here from First Reform for invocation? Nope. Roll call.
Olson. Rice.
Here.
Dosher. McCardle.
Here.
Barrington.
Here.
Allen.
Here.
Charks. Smith.
Here.
Approval of the consent agenda items. Items appearing on the consent agenda may be removed by a city council member for discussion at the beginning of the formal agenda items.
I don't have anything to remove, but I was just going to mention, Mayor, that maybe, Stephanie, you had mentioned that Performance Pet is starting to get their equipment, and if we can just maybe take somewhat of a head count or whatever it is moving forward, so we kind of know what that percentage is or the dollar amount.
What we're anticipating in a sales tax increase.
Sales tax.
You're right, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
What we're anticipating in the sales tax increase for 2018, which would be a one-time influx of revenue, would be $250,000.
Right.
So when you're looking at your sales tax collections for May, you'll see that first and second penny was high and third penny was a lower increase. And we do know that part of the equipment there has already been purchased, and there's already been down payments on other portions of equipment. So we're thinking that might be part of the reasoning for a higher first and second penny than we have in third penny currently.
But you don't have any dollars associated at this point. So we really don't know if we're up or down or even or the same.
Well, it looks like we're up.
We're up a little. Okay.
Yeah, when you look at the sales tax collections, but I won't know till all of their equipment purchase is done to back that back off to see where we end.
Okay.
but I think that at least makes up for the difference in why first and second penny are so much higher than third penny increase. And I don't know if council is interested or not. Lyndon brought this to our attention this morning, and I have not got it transferred over to the website yet, but there is a video that was done on the dedication of the Veterans Memorial. We will have that posted on our website tomorrow. We thought it was appropriate to bring it up since the council will be considering designating the remaining funds for the future maintenance of the Veterans Park as part of the consent agenda today. So if you would like to, I could show it. Otherwise, I would just direct people to the city's website or to the YouTube site to see that video.
Could we see it tonight?
Should we watch our movie that's happening right now? I keep losing my mouse. I apologize.
I am the flag of the United States of America. My name is Old Glory. I fly atop the world's tallest buildings. I stand watch at America's halls of justice. I fly majestically over great institutions of learning, and I stand guard with the greatest military power in the world. Look up, power in the world. I stand for peace, honor, truth, and justice. Honor. Higher. My colors a little truer. I bow to no one. I am recognized all over the world. I am saluted. I am respected. I am revered. I am loved. And I am feared. I have fought in every battle of every war for more than 200 years. Scores of places long forgotten by all except by those who were there with me. I was there. I lead my soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen. I follow them. I watch over them. I watch over them. Old Glory.
I'm going to have to pause it.
Old Glory.
I'm going to have to pause it because you're also hearing our city council meeting. Unless you can play it on yours, Justin.
SDSU student. He's a videographer from Brookings, Alex. Craig, do you remember his last name? No. This kid's got a future. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Wonderful.
I forgot. I'm YouTubing, live streaming our website, so you're hearing it play and hearing it play.
His name is Alex Harold.
Of the United States of America. My name is Old Glory. I fly atop the world's tallest buildings. I stand watch at America's halls of justice. I fly majestically over great institutions of learning, and I stand guard with the greatest military power in the world. Look up and see me. I stand for peace, honor, truth, and justice. I stand for freedom. I am confident. I am arrogant. I am proud. When I am flown with my fellow banners, my head is a little higher. My colors a little truer. I bow to no one. I am recognized all over the world. I am saluted. I am respected. I am revered. I am loved, and I am feared. I have fought in every battle of every war for more than 200 years. Scores of places long forgotten by all except by those who were there with me. I was there. I lead my soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and Coast Guardmen. I follow them. I watch over them. They love me. I was on a small hill on Iwo Jima. It was dirty, battle-worn and tired. But my sailors and Marines cheered me, and I was proud. I was at Ground Zero in New York City on September 11th as cowardly fanatics attacked America. I was raised from the ashes of once proud buildings by brave firefighters, heroes who risked their lives to save others, showing all that America, though bloodied, will never be beaten. I've been a silent witness to all of America's finest hours, but my finest hours come when I am torn and stripped to be used as bandages for my wounded comrades on the field of battle. When I fly at half-mast to honor my fallen warriors, and when I lie in the trembling arms of grieving parents at the gravesite of their fallen son or daughter. I am proud. My name is Old Glory. Long may I wave. Long may I wave.
So again, sorry about the technical difficulty there. If anyone is interested, we will have that uploaded to our website. In addition, it's on the city's YouTube channel, and it has an embed code, so if anybody else is wanting to add that to their website, they can access it there as well.
Do we give this kid any credit on the website?
I think we can.
I think we should.
Yep.
Any more comments on the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve it?
Move to approve. Second.
Is there any public comment?
Mayor Toomey, council members, my name is Dennis Kaus, and I am with the Benevolent Order of Mitchell Elk Lodge. Last year we came before you and started a project of buying solar-powered speed limit signs for the schools. And unfortunately, we didn't get it quite all finished last year, but I'm here this evening to present the check to the city of Mitchell for another $9,000 to help purchase these. And I've talked to Lyndon, that will at least purchase 3, maybe 4, and so we're down to about 3 or 4 signs that we would like left to protect all the schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Is there any other public comment regarding the consent agenda? If not, roll call, please.
Olson.
Aye.
Rice.
Aye.
Dosher. McCardle.
Aye.
Barrington.
Aye.
Allen.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Citizens' input. If you need to address the mayor and members of the city council on an item that was not on the agenda excluding personnel items, please come forward to the podium and state your name and your concern. Presentations are limited to 3 minutes. Items will be considered, but no action will be taken at this time.
Hi, my name is Rosemary Menning, and I just wanted to discuss on May 4th, I was attacked by an uncontrolled dog in the Pioneer Park. It attacked me at the Dakota Discovery Museum, charging me and my 7-month-old puppy. Again, on June 11th, I was attacked by 2 black labs that were loose outside right by my property, no owner present. What I'm wondering from our city council is if the police could review some ordinances and policies on dogs and animals that are at large, uncontrolled by owners, and figure out why so many community members are not obeying leash laws and vaccinating their animals. The dog that bit me was never vaccinated by the man that got it from a rescue. No history of past behaviors. I also know that we do not have an animal control officer hired at this time for me to even talk to about this. And we've got to figure out what we can do in our community to keep us safe. There are at least 12 uncontrolled dogs in my neighborhood. There are no consequences other than to talk to these people. And to me, that just doesn't seem fair to the victims. The dispatchers need to be trained on conversation with the victims. Victim shaming me was not helpful at all. We need to review each attack individually to get the victim's side. I was in shock after 30 minutes of waiting for the police to come. The man was holding his animal down on the ground because he had no other way to hold it, and they had me leave the scene. I think we just need to have the police officers and council members and community members find out what we can do to prevent this. I've been told by police officers, city council members, and community members to carry a weapon, guns, tasers, mace, things like that. Is this our legacy that we're going to give to our Mitchell kids, carrying weapons and being vigilantes and violence because there's no animal control? What about the kids? How do we protect them because they're not carrying weapons? I just want to walk safely in this community and be able to walk with my dog. And right now I cannot do that. And I did want to give this to anybody who's interested. I'll give it to you, Justin, because we talked. But my medical doctors have posted, because this animal that attacked me the first time, it wasn't considered a vicious enough attack because it didn't bite my face or head. But I had extensive medical problems, and I think the council needs to just look at that. I won't keep you by having you hear that, but I did have it in writing from my doctors what happened. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And if you do decide to go forward with doing something, I would be a willing volunteer to help find out why people in our community are not taking this seriously. Dogs at large are really dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you.
We used to have an animal control officer, and why don't we have one?
I'll give you a little update. As of this morning, we had a new animal control officer start. We recently had our past animal control officer. He resigned to take. They're moving to Florida. But in 2017, we do take it serious, and we are proactive. I know it's not enough for some people, and I sympathize with Rose on having to go through this twice in a matter of weeks. And I would challenge dog owners or animal owners to keep control of them. We have a budget of over $91,000 for animal control in Mitchell. In 2017, we captured 317 animals. In 2016, 344 animals, almost one a day that were out there captured. Although that's not going to be enough for the person that gets chased or bit by them. We do have a policy on dangerous animals and potentially dangerous animals, and we have to weigh each circumstance out individually, and that's what we do. There's also, when your animal is impounded, there is a fee you have to pay. Usually the first time it's running at large, we'll give you a warning. If it's the second time, you're going to get a $125 fine on top of that. And that increases by $50 every instance it gets out. So we've had some in the past that have had over $600 fines for animals at large. But that's the most we can do. We can keep fining them. Now, the one thing we could look at is if an animal gets out more than 2 or 3 times, maybe we put an ordinance in there that removes it. They have to remove it from the city. And that's an option that you could consider.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I think it's too late after you've been attacked to do the fines. There are a lot of animals that are at large, and the 2 labs that chased me down the street, there was no fine, just a warning. And I think that if you are waiting for a victim, it's just way too late. You need to be getting these animals under control while they're just running loose. And there's at least 12 in my neighborhood. So there's got to be a way to stop that, either through education. I noticed that none of the veterinary clinics in our city are really pushing leash laws or having any kind of signage up. And maybe we need to put signage up in parks. It was a city park full of kids where I was attacked by that boxer. And I was victim shamed by a lot of rescues in town saying it never happened. Well, you have doctor's notes that say otherwise. And it's too bad that victims have to become a victim after all these dogs are running loose. There's got to be a way that we can look at it and change the standards so people are just safe walking.
Just to clarify, on your first instance, the owner did get a ticket for his animal at large, and then it was impounded 4 days later once we found out you had a bite. Now, this last instance, the officer did not observe the dogs off the owner's property, so we couldn't cite him, but you did.
Right.
So you can sign an affidavit, and they could still go forward with the summons, even today or tomorrow if you want to do it.
But
Because
being chased by an animal is too late. I would like to see us do something to get people to obey the laws. They're not obeying the laws. And really, by the time I have to file a complaint, I've been attacked. I don't want to be attacked anymore. I just want that to stop.
We are looking at varying the times that animal control will be working. Okay, rather than 8 to 5, they may work evenings and Saturdays. It's not going to guarantee. If they work evenings, that means at 8 in the morning, if you go for a walk, that they're going to be there. The officers are going to be there, but they do have a lot of other things going also.
And I agree. I know they do, but I think we need to go back to education. We need to start with veterinary clinics. I mean, they're hosting Lakeview's hosting a vaccination, but they're not saying anything about leash laws. They're not talking to people about keeping their animals restrained. And there are just too many at large. And once you've become a victim, you really realize when you've been hit by an 80-pound dog or you've been chased by 2 black labs, that just shouldn't happen to anybody in our community, especially kids. That park full of kids, that was scary. But I want to see us do some education and not just say, okay, you can complain and something will be done. That's too late.
Any other comments? Is there anyone else that wants to come to the podium and address the council? If not, we'll move into the committee reports. The first one is the public health and safety.
Mayor, can I say something for a second? And I visited with Nathan today just a little bit, going back to the firework cleanup that we have going on. Nathan provided some maps that we just started working on around the lake areas that we are looking to, after the fireworks get done, areas that we're looking for organizations to want to jump on board and do some cleanup to help out with the city for the new fireworks ordinance that has been approved for legalizing shooting of fireworks on July 3rd and July 4th. We do got some fine tuning to do yet, but due to the fact of this council meeting yet, and obviously the next one will be the day before the 4th of July events that start taking place. I just wanted to throw it out there that 4 firework stands have provided some funding. Letters got sent out last week by Stephanie, Fireworks Superstore, Stars Fireworks, Kaboomers, and Myrink Fireworks. So those 4 have participated in our event that we got coming up. They're going to be sending some funds in that'll go into a pot that we can offer private organizations that want to put some money, I guess, in their pot themselves a little bit by helping out the city and cleaning up around Lake Mitchell. Once again, Meadema Sanitation is going to be putting some dumpsters around the lake also. So I'd like to thank those 4 those 4 firework stands and also Meadema Sanitation for helping out with their big contribution to help keep Mitchell clean after our fireworks store. So If anybody is interested in trying to jump on board, or if there's any organizations that are out there that are willing to, I'm going to put it on Nathan for the time being. Reach out to Nathan. Not that you can't reach out to me too, but when we get the details of the map and stuff like that, we'll have an idea what it's going to sort of put in your coffer for this area to clean up. So if somebody's looking for some extra funding and to help out the city, reach out to Nathan, and hopefully within a week or two we'll have the final details for that. So looking forward to a good event and hopefully a good thing for the city of Mitchell.
No other comments on the committee report, Public Health and Safety.
Okay, Public Health and Safety met tonight at 6 p.m. We had one agenda item, a noise permit for 1 North Harmon Drive from 8 p.m. until 12:15 a.m. Motion was approved unanimously on voice vote, and we adjourned at 6:03.
Motion to approve the report.
So moved.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is the traffic report.
Traffic Commission met tonight at 6:03 p.m. with 3 items on the agenda. The first was a request from the Mitchell Area Development Corporation requesting a change of signing in the public parking lot behind the chamber. There's currently 4 30-minute parking spaces Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It was requested that one of the restricted parking signs be removed completely, and the other 3 restricted parking signs be changed from 30-minute to 1-hour parking Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. This motion was approved. Second, Corn Palace Festival Committee requested the following streets and parking lot closures for Corn Palace Festival. North Main Street and half block each direction from 1st to 7th on Tuesday, August 21st at 4:30 a.m. to Monday, August 27th at 4:30 a.m. Closure on the west half of the City Hall parking lot from 4:30 a.m. on Tuesday, August 21st to 4:30 a.m. on Monday, August 27th. Closure on the 5th and Main parking lot on Tuesday, August 21st at 4:30 a.m. to Monday, August 27th at noon. And closure of the Northwestern parking lot on Tuesday, August 21st at 4:30 a.m. to Monday, August 27th at noon. Also allowing overnight camping at the Disco Lot, 800 North Lawler for Carnival Company workers, and also to block off the 100 block of East 3rd from 3:30 p.m. Monday, August 20th to 12 noon on Monday, August 27th for Gold Star Amusement Box Office Administrative Offices. And this is just the west half of that block up to the alley. This was also approved. Next, there was a request from Susan Galpin for a no parking zone in front of her house by her mailboxes located at 1529 Country Drive due to ongoing issue with somebody parking in front of it. After discussion, this motion was tabled to the July Traffic Commission meeting to see if there's any further incidents. The person who was parking there was present and indicated that this will no longer happen. We then adjourned at 6:18 p.m.
Motion to approve the Traffic Committee report.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is an action to approve 8 West LLC doing business as Super 8 Mitchell for renewal of malt beverage license.
We would have no opposition to that.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is a hearing. We have 3 hearings, and the first one is on the application of Palace City Lions Club for a special event malt beverage license located at the Horseman Sports Arena for July 19th, 20th, 21, and 22 of 2018 for the Corn Palace Stampede Rodeo.
Motion to approve.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is on the application of Palace City Lions Club for special event malt beverage license located at the Horseman Sports Arena for August 22nd, 2018 for the Mustang Seeds Extreme Bowls. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is on the application of Corn Palace Shrine Club for an on-off sale malt beverage license located at the Masonic Temple, 112 East 5th Avenue.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Entertaining a motion for the city council to recess and sit as the Board of Adjustment. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is action to set the date for the Board of Adjustment hearing for July 2nd, 2018. Laura Pychek has applied for a conditional use permit to operate a family residential child care center in her residence at 1033 East First Avenue, legally described as Lot 2, Block 3, Driving Park Addition, City of Mitchell, Davidson County, South Dakota. The property is zoned R3, medium density residential district. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Entertaining motion for the Board of Adjustment to adjourn and the City Council to reconvene in regular session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is a presentation and review of Lake Mitchell design refinement.
Mayor, members of the council, tonight we're having the fire presentation. It was requested back in April by the council. We did have a quick report on Thursday to the Lake Committee, the Watershed Advisory Committee, and the Technical Advisor Team were all present. Several of them are here tonight. So some of the information that we're going to get is new to us as well. So we're not making any recommendation tonight. We will come back next month after our regular Lake Committee meeting, and once the new mayor Bobby Everson is on board, we can get some direction from him as well. And we'll come back next month, and based on whatever feedback that you give or the public gives tonight, that'll help us out in making decisions and giving you a recommendation, hopefully next month. So I'll go ahead and let Mike Sotek and Greg and also Connor is here from Fire Engineering to present.
Good evening, everybody. Mr. Mayor, City Council. We're here tonight to deliver the, I guess you call them draft reports for the purpose of the design refinement phase, the internal load control project. So as Nathan said, Connor Kelly's here from, works with me at Fire Engineering, and then Greg Kipp from Verax, who's been involved in the project and familiar face to you by now. So, so where we're at tonight basically is to present the results of the last phase of this design refinement. There's, as you'll see at the end, there's some opportunity for some input from the council, staff, et cetera. And so other than that, we consider the work complete except for fine tuning and everything. And we got some recommendation actually from the Lake Committee Thursday on how they'd like to kind of put this together with the original technical memorandum and kind of serve that as a finalize that document without any additional work to it and use these two documents as an appendix to that. So that's really all that's remaining here besides addressing any additional questions you have tonight. So so I guess Stephanie will just have to click. So since the April meeting when I spoke to you last, we've been busy here preparing two documents. The document on the left, Greg's going to talk to you about, and that was the lake sediment phosphorus partitioning, and then the right one is as we're calling it, the draft technical memorandum for the Lake Mitchell Rehabilitation Project Phase 2, which is the internal load control project. So go ahead, Stephanie, and I'll explain what each one of those is there real quick. So this is backing up a little bit. After the first TM, we identified some additional things that were needed to refine the design and also to answer the questions that you gave me at the April 2nd meeting. So that's what we're going to talk about. The first step was the work that Greg did, where we actually analyzed the sediment cores, as you remember, part of the original contract, or as far as the first supplemental contract to the original TM. We went out and collected some additional cores there. This was for the work that actually analyzed those, sent them off to labs, and did the sediment partitioning, which is to understand the nature of the binding of the sediment. So with that, for the first part of this, I'm going to turn it over to Greg to talk about what that means and the results of that.
Let's see. Do we have a flipper? Or
I think just have to cue Stephanie.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stephanie. Greg Kipp from Verax. It's nice to see everybody again. One of the big questions we want to answer in this phase is why did we do additional corings? And if we go back to November and December when the original technical memorandum was coming out, we noticed that back in the last decade when the city was doing a lot of alum treatments, there was really a short duration for which alum provided relief. And that meant that there was phosphorus coming in from another source, and the most likely place for that phosphorus to be coming in from is the lake bed. And so if you recall, during the winter, we developed a hypothesis that there might be a lot of this black iron phosphate salt down there. And to test that hypothesis, we looked at doing the corings, and it was also associated with understanding the depth of sediments out there, but we needed to verify whether these ferrous phosphate salts were actually out there because they can dissolve back into the water column. It's no longer a hypothesis. We've verified that there's a lot of it out there. That's something that's characteristic of very highly impacted lakes. And if one of the benefits of understanding this is if the city were to go out and just apply alum, as many lakes do, the city would end up spending millions of dollars and end up with very temporary relief and get locked in to basically a pattern of applying alum with very limited success and high expense. So that was the one of the major efforts out there. The other part is to understand how the lake is partitioning phosphorus within the lakes, so that we can understand what kind of natural processes are in place that help bind phosphorus, what kind of vulnerable sediments are out there, and also what kind of amendments might be possible that can help us help Mother Nature keep phosphorus bound to the lake bed, or and in the case of having large thicknesses, where we need to remove if necessary. So we'd also done lake bathymetry that involved actually physically forcing a probe down to refusal at the bottom. The sediment cores that we obtained are really divided into three major areas, three major sediment types that we found in the lake. The first type is close to the mouth of Firesteel Creek, where there's a lot of sands and silts that are commingled with organics. What we found out there is when Firesteel Creek is under high discharge, when it's really flowing, we get a lot of sands and silts that are being deposited near the mouth. But when Firesteel Creek is at low discharge, it's quiescent, and we get more traditional lake deposits. So there's interfingering of organics and silts up near the mouth. And what we tested with a couple of those is some of those silts and sands to understand how those kind of interact, and to see if we can use Mother Nature's capping, natural capping in the mouth, to try to help retain some of that high phosphorus organic stuff at the bottom. The other type of sediment was what you would typically expect in a lake bottom, a lot of black, muddy, very fine materials, and that's where we found high proportions of these ferrous phosphate salts and a lot of organics. So those sediments are very susceptible to releasing phosphorus. And then the third type of sediment we found was the sediment that was originally in place before the reservoir was constructed. So this is the old alluvium that's at the very bottom that would have been tilled back in the early days because there was farming down in the river valley. And that's evidence to be original soils because we had a lot of rounded materials and even pebbles up to 1.5 inches out in the middle of the lake and close down to the dam. Well, the only way that you get those kind of sediments is if you're in the original alluvium that was underneath the former deposits. And those sediments turned out to be the least likely to release phosphorus. Now, they've been impregnated with a little bit of lake muds from the top, but they're still quite resistant to releasing P, and with a little bit of amendment, they would be very successful. So that tells us that alum amendment would be very, and we'll get into this a little bit more in detail, but alum amendment would be very expensive and with limited temporary success, and dredging options are more likely to be successful. And then there was also the issue of doing aggressive aeration, and what we found is, having these ferrous phosphate types of materials and a lot of organics in the muds, any kind of aggressive aeration would release copious amounts of phosphorus up into the lake, into the water column. So we learned a lot of information about the lake from this coring effort. Next slide, please. One of the ways that scientists look at partitioning soils in a sediment extraction, and I'll be quick about this because it's a lot of science, is they look at looking at easily exchanged materials, kind of like what your water softener does in your house to remove hard water ions. It's the same kind of absorption process, only it's phosphorus, and we use salts to remove that to understand how much is on there. The next is iron, and most scientists don't segregate out the rusty iron from the black iron, and that's what we did in this step, is to try to understand how that iron is partitioned, because it plays a very important role in how it would respond to lake management issues. The other fraction, which is a very important fraction in Lake Mitchell, is the calcium phosphorus fraction, and I'll get into that in a little bit here. And then the final fraction is an organic fraction, where we have a lot of organic materials, and that can be everything from dead algae to leaf litter that floats down the creek to very soluble organic materials that have been broken down by biological activity. And we separate those into label organics, which are very available immediately to biota, and then to those more resistant organics, kind of like the leaf litter and things that take a little longer to degrade. Next, please. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but because there's a lot of numbers here. The essence of this is we found that the native sediments that were there before the reservoir was put in are extremely rich in calcium-bound phosphorus, which are the most resistant fraction to release of calcium. That's very good news, because what that means is if we are able to remove those soft black sediments and expose the cleaner, more resistant sediments at the bottom, we can do a lot to control internal loading. The other thing we learned from this is that we are storing lots of calcium and iron in those black sediments. And this is something that Mother Nature does in association with biota. It just stores a lot of iron and calcium in those reducing conditions. We can use those things in the future to help mitigate internal loading as the project proceeds, and also as external loading gets addressed. Okay. So I talked a little bit about calcium and phosphorus and how it's bound up, and there's a really important pattern here. The native calcium, and these samples down here on the bottom, the best one was the original lake bed sediments underneath the traditional lake beds. This is the old alluvium that would have been farmed. We're seeing a lot of phosphorus being bound with a relatively small amount of calcium. When we get into these black lake muds, we see less phosphorus being bound, and it takes a lot of calcium to do it. And what that's telling us is Mother Nature has given us vast reserves of calcium in these lake muds to be able to control phosphorus in the future. We wouldn't want to address the huge, thick deposits out there. It'd be too expensive. But in the future, there's opportunity to utilize some of this natural calcium to help bind future phosphorus that comes in. And we know how to do that from our dentists. Calcium and phosphorus can combine with fluoride to form fluorapatite. It's the very same minerals that you have in your teeth. And if there's any question about whether or not that's a long-term storage for phosphorus, we can see dinosaurs in any paleontological museum. They're hundreds of millions of years old. That type of mineral stays put basically forever for geologic time. If we can go ahead. So a couple of concluding thoughts and recommendations. One of the biggest issues is that ferrous iron is a significant part of the lake sediment fractions, right? And that really kind of constrains the management options that we have out there. There's a vast supply of underutilized calcium in the lake, which we can use for long-term management. It doesn't allow us to address the big thick sediments that are out there. You don't go 90 years with these huge deposits, or putting it in health terms, for example, you don't go 90 years and develop high blood pressure and diabetes and then start eating vitamins and think we're going to cure it, right? We've got issues out there, but the long-term management of the lake would benefit greatly by utilizing this natural calcium. Alum addition is inappropriate for direct addition to the sediments because number one, it's an expensive form of aluminum, and number two, it contains acids and sulfur which would frustrate those calcium binding sites. And then the fourth major point that we get out of this is that ongoing maintenance of the lake through amendments would likely be required, pending implementation of external loading controls, right? So if we get the internal loading sequestered, there may be some management in the several years it would take to get an external loading project up and running. Okay. So really, what does this all mean? And we'll get into some of the costing. We looked at a variety of different methods to try to control this, but essentially what we're looking at is in the upper area here where we have lots of sand and silt deposits, it's not going to behoove us to do a lot of work in that area because Mother Nature is providing a cap already, or if we put any amendments in there, Mother Nature could just as easily rip those out through high flow periods. And we find down in the native sediments that we've got pretty good control, but we've got all of this organic muck that really needs to come out. There really isn't a feasible way of addressing that without removing it. Okay.
All right. So that was, in essence, kind of the work that was done as part of Greg's task there to do that. And now we're going to kind of focus a little bit more on what is in the new technical memorandum regarding the internal load control and how we use that information. So if I talked about the biggest three things we had to accomplish during this, is number one, confirm the quantity of the soft sediments and what that means to the project. What are the alternatives for removing or capping those sediments, as Greg just kind of talked about. And then lastly, pertaining to a lot of the questions that were asked, what are some of the design constraints and their potential effects on cost for this phase? So in terms of soft sediment quantity, I'm going to let Connor take over here a little bit and talk about this. So you saw this map before. We did a estimated quantity based upon the cores that were done through these valley sections when we were out here in February. And due to the ice thickness, due to some other reasons, the electronic equipment didn't work great at that time, so we felt it was our responsibility to make sure that we come back to you this time and we have a good handle on what that quantity is. So Connor's going to take you through that process we did.
And just looking at this map, we can see the data points with different colors, and what we were generally finding was from the 60 or so sample sites that we did sample, we found that sediment was a little bit thinner on the overbanks, and in some places it was very thin and there's almost none. But then in the area of the historic stream channel, which is represented by that black line, we found very thick sediment thicknesses up to more than 7 feet. So we wanted to try to refine those quantities down in between the areas that we sampled that are shown on that graph, Stephanie. So we used what's called a dual frequency echo sounder, and it's shown there partially submerged attached to the boat that we drove around the lake. And what that was able to do for us is it could give us a depth, so we could gauge the actual depth of the water at the location, and then a second depth that was down to a harder sediment that we would call the pre-existing lake bed, because the sediments in between there are very soft and would have been deposited after the lake was built. And with that device, we got more than 10,000 data points across the full length and area of the lake. Next slide. And with all of those data points, we were able to build a computerized surface of the top of the sediment and of the bottom of the sediment. And from that, we could derive a volume. And we were able to produce these maps. And we were able to look at it just from the data we collected. And then we were also able to back check to a topographic map that was produced just before the lake was constructed in 1927. So we could make sure that our numbers were coming out to about the same both ways. So these are the volumes that we found partitioned into the few different areas of the lake. The volume that's shown in the first slide is the volume that was found using just the instrument that we had on the boat, and it's about 1.3 million cubic yards of unconsolidated sediment. And then we wanted to make sure that we were fully capturing the thicker sediments in the historic stream channel. So we looked at stream slopes and matched that to some of the measurements we recorded through manual probing at those locations. And we found that there is an additional 600,000 cubic yards residing in the historic stream channel. And adding those, if we could go to the next slide, adding those two numbers together, we get to about 2 million cubic yards. And then we also looked at the 1927 map, and we come to about 2.25 million cubic yards. So looking at that, if we could go to the next slide, we would try to infer a consolidation ratio from the unconsolidated sediments to the estimated amount of dredged spoil material, which is the amount of material we would move out of the lake and into a dredge disposal site. And that would be about 50% the volume that we would be removing from the lake. So it comes out to about 1 million cubic yards.
When you say dredge disposal site, how big do you think?
So 1 million yards. If you deposited 1 million yards over 40 acres, you got about 15.5 feet tall, and so that's what that works out to be. And so that's what we need to plan on. And so as Connor took us through that million. So we're assuming 50%. So I'm just going to spend 2 seconds talking about that. This is the table you saw from Greg's output. I put an arrow next to the solids column here. As you can see, we've got so that's of that sample taken. That's percentage of that sample that was solids. And so as you can see, the only ones that are anywhere over 50%, 60, 71, 59, those are either A, in those sediments that are up at the headwaters of the lake that Greg talked about are full of a lot of sand, et cetera. And so that's one of the areas we're not touching. And then the other one is when we got into the original hard pan, like the sediment 4 of 59%. If we look at the rest of them, when we're in those mid-20s, that's when we know we're in those unconsolidated soft sediments. So when we talk about a dredging project and we talk about how much does that cost per cubic yard, we pay for that in consolidated sediment. So what's the sediment in place? And so we're going forward today with the information we have where we feel a conservative value is a 50% consolidation rate. We think it's probably less than that, meaning it's not going to be 1 million yards in place. So it's a conservative estimate at that. And that way we can make some adjustments in the field or have a little bit to play with. So just for the purpose of today, that we feel is a conservative estimate there. What we don't have is a consistent range of the sediments down through that historic valley, where you get, as the image on the right is trying to say, the deeper the sediments, the more you weight you have, the more they'll kind of compress in place. But even at the bottom of any alluvial deposit, which is water deposited sediments, it's pretty rare that you get anything over a 50% consolidation rate. If you get that, that means you either got sand or weight pushing down on top of them, or you're into the original ground. So when we talk about the alternatives we considered for this internal load control, and this is what we talked about before, we talked about mechanical dredging, hydraulic dredging. We talked about the ability to maybe get in there and cap some of these sediments there. And then lastly, just for a purpose of putting in another point here, what if you did no dredging? What if you did nothing else? We just used a chemical treatment of a lake by itself, which we're referring to as a whole lake amendment. And so that's what we looked at there. So I'm going to go get through these quickly here. So mechanical dredging, we looked at what it takes to drain a lake to the greatest extent possible. We want to remove those targeted sediments that just using mechanical means, using heavy equipment there, dredges, barges, front end loaders, etc. The dredge spoils are then hauled to a disposal site where they're placed, dried, and stabilized in place. The targeted sediments that in the historic Fire Creek channel that Connor talked about, those are going to be tough to get to mechanically because they're deep. The actual, if you look at the plan area of the old creek channel, we got about 700 acres of lake. That's actually about 52 acres. So about 7% of the lake surface is, the old channel. And so when we can't draw the water down that far, you obviously can't drive a dozer in there. When it's 100 foot across, whether or not you can grab that with a long reach excavator, it gets a little tougher to do mechanically. And so 2 things happen. Number one, you can either pump that stuff out hydraulically, and even treat it mechanically, even in the lake bed, or it's going to be a little bit more difficult of a process. Getting out, draining the lake bed down, it's basically, if you think about the lake when we start draining it down, the higher the sediment is, the easier it's going to be to get. It's thinner, The lake's going to be drier, less of a chance it gets reflooded, etc. So the lower we get, the more difficult it gets. The stuff in the upper part is pretty easy from a mechanical standpoint. When we get into that creek channel, that's when we have to get into those options. And so I'm going to talk about what we did there. We also looked at, continue to provide water to POET during dredging. So we'll talk about that there. Then we also looked at a post-dredging soil amendment to neutralize future phosphorus release from the native lake bottom alluvial soils. So that's one of the benefits of mechanical dredging, and I'm going to show a comparison of those here in a minute, is that we can go in and very inexpensively disc in some chemicals to help provide and help prevent additional release from the native soils that would happen naturally. So that's a plus for us in terms of buying us time to enjoy the lake until the rest of the project can be implemented, which is addressing the external load. We also look at address shoreline stability concerns, et cetera, and have a couple things for you to consider in terms of how you want to move forward. So I'm going to talk about some of those. So when we talk about lake draining here, and Connor put this graph together, this is a little tough to see here, but what we looked at is an SPN and job in town did a good job with a report that they did, and we used that along with some other information where we said, okay, what if we pump this thing out, using about 100 CFS or 45,000 gallon a minute in pumps? What if we pumped it out using about 200 CFS? These are big pumps. These aren't pumps that you see on a farm, pumping an irrigation well. These are New Orleans type pumps. They're big. But you can get them, and you can use several of them to get there. And so then this plot basically says at that lake surface acres there, that's how long it takes to pump it down to the lowest point there. So, you bet, Mel.
So that's a lot of water. Where does it go?
Pump it just through the spillway to the James River. And so I'm going to address that too in a little bit here. Then we looked at, so the two pumps running left to right is 100 CFS. The red one's there is a 42-inch pipe. Because if you remember, one of the things we also looked at was putting a low flow drawdown on the riser. So I'm going to talk about that too. And then so that's the 200 CFS gets it down in about 13 days. A 42-inch pipe would get it down in about 24 days. A 100 CFS would get it down in about 28 days. And then the siphon never really gets it down because of the limited capacity there. So the interesting part, so let's look at the table here real quick. And so what we said was, okay, if we draw this thing, one of the things we're worried about is we pay money to draw this thing down. And so, by the way, to pump down all the water we have to pump down using 100 CFS of pumping power is going to cost about $200,000 in electricity and fuel. Using a 200 CFS is cost about $250,000. So that's just to pump it down the first time. You're going to pay either $200,000, $250,000 if pumps are used. Okay. Worst thing that happens is you do that and the next day it rains, right? And we got to repump it down. So that's one of the biggest challenges of this handling of water during a mechanical dredging project. So what we're looking at here is, I asked Connor to say, okay, what happens if we draw this thing down? We got the water down, we're ready to start dredging. What's the percentage chance that it can rain, given historical rainfall and runoff in a watershed, on that the top two rows are 50% of the lake got refilled, and then the bottom two row are 100%. Then if you look by month, that's the percent chance that it could rain that month, going across here, across the calendar, and refill that. So we've always talked to you about, the fall is always the best time for dredging. It is almost all the time because that's your lowest risk for big runoff events. In this watershed, in this part of the state, extremely low risk. So if we look at a construction season that's kind of bracketed down here from September to December there, and we look there, we got, in September 3%, November 6%. That's a percentage chance that gets refilled. This column, the next to last column right here, is in September to February. Basically, we're saying you'd have about a 16% chance if you had these pump capacities in place, about a 16% chance it could refill halfway, about a 6% chance it could fill using the higher pumps. But we get down into here, now we only got about a 1 or 2% chance. So we feel a lot better about our risk in terms of doing construction that time of the year. So this is going to come back. If we extend September to February to August to February, August is a nice time to drain a lake because it's hot and things dry out a lot quicker. That changes those percentages quite a bit, as you can see, just in terms of risk. That's our risk in the lake being reflooded. Okay, let's move on. So in terms of managing mechanical dredging, you know, to address the Poet water supply, it didn't turn out to be too bad. If we're looking at the lake here, and we got the railroad embankment there, we got the Poet intake right about there. So there's two different scenarios where you could build a little cofferdam along this red line, just downstream of the bridge there, downstream of the Poet intake. Or you could even look and do it and reduce your risk a little bit by putting a blue one there and a blue at the other end of the canal. Put cofferdams in there. That would hold water through the system. And by the way, the system here and the little canal through there and the headwaters here are two of the areas that through Greg's report is recommended. Those are definitely not the highest priorities for dredging because of the sand caps that are in place capping some of the other sediments. Okay, so the good news is we looked at a lot of other options, and in talking with Becky at Poet and talking to others, and Kyle and others about some of the other options we look at, which are addressed in the report, you know, using municipal water, reducing usage, et cetera. This turned out to be the best way, and honestly doesn't add a whole lot to the project in terms of cost, and actually might even help us with a couple other things. So all in all, it's certainly not an insurmountable problem. Add some costs here, and we'll talk about those in a minute. All right, Stephanie. So we looked at shoreline considerations here, and so I've talked to you about this before. One of the things we have to worry about are the effects of rapid drawdown. And so if we do draw the lake down quickly, one of the things you have to worry about is shoreline stability. Because what happens is you have saturated soils on both sides of a seawall. If you draw the lake down, then you have saturated soils behind a seawall without the pressure of the lake holding the lake side of the seawall up. And so seawalls, as I'm told, you know, represent somewhere around 25–30% probably of the perimeter of the lake. So we need to assess those, do an inventory, find out what's going on, and ultimately the city's going to have to develop some kind of a policy if they choose to go the mechanical engineering route to look at holding those in place. So we can either look at, you know, helping to stabilize those, becomes a homeowner issue, that's left to be determined. You know, there's also some docks are built better than others for lakes to be drained. Some boat lifts are built better than others for lakes to be drained. We need to look at those collectively, understand, you know, on a lot by lot basis, what are we dealing with there and what can we do to help prevent those. We've used things such as temporary piling, placement of rock during refilling, et cetera. We've done different things to handle those, but until we go out and do a real good, solid inventory there, the cost for this have been kind of included in a contingency. Okay, so next slide, Stephanie. So if we look at the mechanical costs, and these are explained in the TM here, just the items, I'm going to go down real quick, just the mobilizing, what it takes the contractor to get their bonds in place, get to the site, the handling of water. What I've done is I put in the cost of pumping the lake down once there, and then again another time a half, just as a risk. My advice would probably, you know, I think the way you'd probably have to set it up is we're going to pay for the contractor to pump the lake down, and then ultimately you can either put it on the contractor to take the risk of additional, and they can gamble, or you can just say we're going to take that risk so you don't have to gamble on the price, and we'll just pay for it if it happens again during that time. Understanding the risks that I've given you of the chance of that occurring. Spoil area preparation there, that's going to be a function of where the sites are. We've had through working with the Lake Committee and a Design Charrette Committee and Mayor Toomey and Nathan, they've given me some sites that are potential areas for that. One of the things that's most important is, and this is covered in the TM, is that we've made an assumption, so a big cost, a big change in the unit cost of mechanical and hydraulic dredging is a distance to the disposal site. You're either trucking it further or you're pumping it further. And so if I've assumed a distance based upon local contractors, other similar projects, where the maximum distance right now is 1.5 miles. If you come back to me and say the best place we can get is 10 miles away, that of course changes cost significantly. So then as you can see here in the mechanical part, what I've done, I've given you 2 different volumes and 2 different rates. So if the entire project could be done mechanically, that's pretty close to a rate per consolidated cubic yard that we'd be looking at. We had a very similar project in size down in Lincoln, Nebraska recently. Attracted contractors from all over the Midwest. I would guess you'd get at this volume that kind of interest in this project as well. And so you're looking at, you know, somewhere around $475, $5. As you can see, I've increased that quite a bit to get the volume of material, which is about 400,000 cubic yards, out of the valley there. And so There's a couple opportunities there, I think, to maybe either a joint mechanical hydraulic project, and ultimately we'd look at those, look at contractor capabilities. Different contractors have different equipment. One of them is going to say, you know, that scares the heck out of me. The other one's going to say, oh, I got just a piece of equipment for that. And so I've added some more to that to be safe. Cofferdam in place to hold back water to keep the intake to the Poet flooded there. As you can see, I think that is a pretty conservative estimate there. And then this next part is that post-dredging soil amendment that Greg started talking about there. And so that's talking about going in and mixing something in to the soil after the mechanical dredging project to help prevent the natural release of phosphorus from the old lake bottom. And I'm going to come back to that, so I'm not going to skip over it right now. All right, Stephanie. So the other thing that we said we look at is looking at the installing the drawdown conduit. So these are from the spillway modification project that was done years ago. We took some of those, and this is really just shown in concept here. What we would be talking about doing is building a tower some distance away from the existing crest, and this is assumed to be about a 42-inch pipe. Have to go through the concrete there, bore through the concrete, and make that kind of a modification. And then you'd have a 42-inch pipe out to the lake, and then some sort of a valve here. And so in plan view, of course, it would look a little bit different than this. This is just a simplified view here. But if we did this, then you've got a tool that you can use in the future, and now you've got something other than pumps to help move the lake down. Okay? So let's look at the price of that real quick, Stephanie. So here, this is looking at, you know, linear footage of I'm assuming about 100 foot of ductile iron pipe. You could also take this through a dam. You can take it through the dam. You can take it over the dam. There's other options you have there. And in my opinion, this is the shortest distance. This is also safer for the dam because we're not putting another pipe through the dam and boring it or jacking it through the dam. It saves a lot of pipe length, and you also get the benefit of using the existing spillway to convey it through the dam and the energy dissipation at the bottom of the existing spillway chute to help slow the water down before it gets to the James River. So we've assumed a knife gate valve in there at about $50,000. You'd have to build a valve housing out of concrete there, have some wall sleeves, etc. And then you would have some structural modifications to that as well. And so I can tell you, you know, we design valves and pipes and pump houses. We would be looking at hiring a structural specialist to help work with the spillway amendment there. That's certainly a specialty item there. And so every one of these I've put a construction total along with contingencies. So I've got contingencies in at this level at 20% for each one of these phases. Obviously on the bigger dredging costs, that ends up being a lot more money to handle unknowns and some of those things like shoreline. We talked about a construction total. We've assumed some level of engineering here. You'll notice I didn't point this out the mechanical. I didn't point this out the mechanical project, but that was at about 6% engineering fees as a percentage of construction costs. These are at 20, smaller project, definitely higher technical requirements here, some construction observation time, and then a total project. And it's laid out that way for every alternative. All right, I'll keep moving, Stephanie. So we're going back here, and so what's important to think about here is that pump curve I showed you. So the nice thing about this is that if you put this in, we've now reduced the need to pump down the lake. We can use this installing a drawdown to pump down the lake. You could build this through the summer months using a cofferdam near the riser, keeping the lake full, and then when you're ready to open up the lake, you know, get it in place and get that ready to go. So it can help you save some time. It also helps manage water on a normal basis, just normal water that runs through the lake during the construction period. And then, of course, if it ever refloods during construction, heaven forbid, also helps to save those costs once again. So there's a little bit of a value in you get some of this back in essence. All right, Stephanie. So when we talk about hydraulic dredging, you see on the left there, this is kind of a typical cutter head here. This is just working off of a barge here. You don't see a whole lot. You see a barge out in the middle of the lake with either a cutter head or this is a cutter head, which actually kind of goes and disturbs soil because we're dredging natural lake bed. When we're dredging consolidated sediment, it's more like a shop vac. It's essentially an underwater vacuum that goes and just sucks that unconsolidated soil off, pumps it to a plant in a slurry. The plant separates it with different technologies that dredgers use to separate that. They repump cleaner water back to the lake and then deposit the soils on site there. So next slide here. And so when we talk about hydraulic dredging, the other difference is, and this is covered in the TM, is when you plan for mechanical dredging, you need to essentially look at storing, whatever volume of dry material you need. If we need to store 1 million yards, we're looking at 1 million yards. When we do hydraulic dredging, it doesn't have to be permanent, but we have to look at the possibility of storing. Most dredgers want a minimum of 2 times the volume. So they would want to be able to store 2 million cubic yards of water and soil. Most of them would prefer 3. Now, one of the ideas, instead of having, in a hydraulic situation, one of the ideas was even if you pump the lake kind of partially down, you could use the lake coves as a separator to store material and haul it off mechanically as well. So there's a few ideas we have to do that, but if we're looking for 40 acres of disposal ground in a mechanical situation, we're probably looking for 80 or 20 in a hydraulic situation. And then you got a larger pit to manage, as you can see there. All right, let's go to the next slide. So hydraulic dredging costs, other than that, not a lot of impact. We don't have the shoreline considerations. We don't have the POET intake considerations. And if we're not draining the lake to dredge it, we're not going to put in a drawdown. So what we do have, though, is a lot of the same items there, except for the price. So the unit price for hydraulic dredging is usually more than it is for mechanical dredging. You sometimes 30–35%. We got a project recently, and the price was $6.20 for less. So I've put in 7 there for now to hold as a placeholder there, so you can see what that does to the big number there. We've also included, as well as this, a post-dredging whole lake application of an amendment that's discussed in detail in the TM, and that's to do the same thing. It's to control any internal load after the project. Greg talked about how the existing native soils are high in phosphorus. Not near as high, and they're not as available as the soft sediments, but there's still phosphorus in the soils. So while we're doing things, we can control these while we get into place the external loading project or near lake project that we've talked about. And I'm going to come back to that as well. Here, engineering, design, and permitting some of that at 5% of this cost here. So there's a lot of details to be worked out in those. I've just used kind of planning level percentages at this point. But as you can see, the total cost there for a hydraulic situation a little bit higher than mechanical. Okay, so if we look at the two here, these are some of the things we looked at, and this is just kind of summary of what I just said. So if we look at the soft sediment removal effectiveness, the mechanical is really nice because we've got that lake down and we can visually see we got it all. In a hydraulic situation, hydraulic dredgers can tell you, especially the ones that do a lot of soil remediation and contaminated soil removal from rivers, they can really get in there and get close, but I can tell you that there's no way they can do it as well as if we can visually see what's happening. In terms of the seasonal considerations, there's an advantage to hydraulic dredging because you can basically do it anytime there isn't ice on the lake or freezing temperatures. We are pumping water and asking water to bleed off and be returned, and so we don't want freezing air out there and can't do it with ice on the lake. When we talk about the disruption to the sounding area here, both projects are going to be noisy. Hydraulic dredging uses a lot of big diesel pumps. Mechanical equipment has a lot of equipment, a lot of dump trucks moving around. Both are going to be noisy. When we talk about traffic, of course, hydraulic has very little. We're going to have some pipelines, and they can build little speed bumps over the pipelines. Between the lake and the dredge disposal area. You do have considerations with mechanical with the trucks. You got to pick a route where roads are stable. You're not going to do too much damage, and just what's going to be the best for the people around there. Shoreline considerations. There's a plus and minuses to each one. The bad news is that when you drain a lake for mechanical dredging, you usually deal with some damage to the shoreline. The good news is you can make repairs easy. So hydraulic dredging, you don't anticipate that your project's going to cause any problem to the shoreline, but you also lost the opportunity to do anything to some places that need fixing there. So size of the containment area required. The mechanical is a positive there because it's half to a third of the hydraulic. The short-term internal load control is less expensive with the mechanical, and then the overall project cost with the mechanical is also a plus. So one of the things that we talked about is at the end of the last TM is that when we're done with this, we're not done. Even if we did a 100% perfect job here and we removed, still anticipating somewhere around 47% of the total loading to the lake, which is internal load, we've still got internal loading. And so this is a runoff from the spring events this year. So if you look at the calendar dates along the bottom here, the blue line represents the inflow past the gauge in Firestill Creek. The black line shows a cumulative volume over those dates. And on the right side here, what that shows is the runoff volume divided by the lake volume. So what that says is by the time we got to the end of April here, the lake had turned over 6 times. And so when a lake turns over 6 times in 2 months, you know, all of that loading's external. It doesn't have a chance for the internal load to get moving again. Not all of it, but a vast majority of that lake is an external load. And so at this testing point here, when we got out in the lake and tested it on 420 Earth Day, we got 58 milligrams, 0.58 milligrams per liter, 580 parts per billion. We're trying to get it down to less than 100. And so we know that at the end of a dredging project, and every time and this was a big runoff year. This was a huge runoff year for the watershed. But we know, next slide, Stephanie, that as we talked about in the original TM, you know, this measures, that fell right here. It fell right with the other data. So we know when we get big gully washers, we get high volumes of phosphorus coming down from the watershed. As we move to the right on this graph here, wet conditions, average conditions, dry conditions, the medians drop, but not near as bad as we can see over here. So every year when we're done with this project, and we've got the internal load under control, that next spring, we're going to get reflooded from until that external load is handled, we're going to get reflooded with high phosphorus runoff. And we're going to get to the point where we've got levels in the lake like you got right now that are getting set up, and there's plenty of phosphorus in there for algae blooms. So go ahead, Stephanie. We also, and this is the model redone with the newest information we have. This is the model redone after the internal loading project. And so if we look at post-project, the light blue, this is 200. So we want about halfway down this first column, that's where we want it. So we can still see, we still get those peaks in the summer that are coming from the external loading and the other conditions that lead to high phosphorus in the middle of the summer. So how we handle that, and we talked about before, next slide, Stephanie, is that we've talked about the need to do an annual maintenance treatment. And so we've sized this, we've put in the value of this based upon, and this is until the external project can get in place. We've controlled the internal load. If Mother Nature is not good to us and we get very high phosphorus loads in the spring, then something that one time the alum does work for this is just stripping the water column. And so one of the things we talked about was getting to the point where after we do this project, we can develop a usable lake. And so we need to consider the opportunity and the chance for this to happen every year so we have a usable lake until we can implement the rest of the project. And so we're probably guessing a little bit conservatively on the rate here. That's a function of what we're doing for phosphorus content this year. If we don't get the big runoff next year, this value would be less. All right, Stephanie. So there's certainly a chance it could happen every year until we get that external controlled. So one of the other things we talked about looking at was sediment capping as a method of potentially, is there something we can do so that we don't have to remove all them soils, those targeted soils from the lake? And so we did look at sediment capping, and I'll let Greg talk about that.
And Councilman Olson, I just want to address your question a little bit as well. When we say every year with the alum, it's not a substitute for dealing with the external load. It's just to get some relief pending that. But we also looked at sediment capping options and explored the possibility of using local materials or bringing in materials from other locations. Instead of doing an expensive study on the watershed, I managed to find a lot of materials in the literature, phosphorus levels, and what we've got is a lot of marine sediments that have high phosphorus levels, and then glacial till that has stirred those up. But it's pretty difficult to find low phosphorus materials reliably in the area. Some of the best materials that would be available to us locally would be the original lake bottom sediments underneath the traditional lake bed, right? The materials that existed that were being farmed in the alluvium before the reservoir existed. Those were washed by Firestill Creek. They were farmed. They were depleted of phosphorus. They're the most resistant version. But even with those local materials, if we excavated those out to provide a cap were still too expensive to make a decent cap on some of those thick sediments that are in the old channel of Firestill Creek. So we also looked at phosphorus absorbing materials that might be able to be shipped in, and a lot of those materials, like the cheaper materials like bauxite or red muds, they're just too bulky. And so even though they're cheaper to purchase the materials, the cost of shipping the materials out to Mitchell make them too expensive to utilize. So if we're going to have anything that acts as an amendment, it needs to be incredibly efficient. One of the things I want to help people understand too is alum. Alum gets a good reputation for being applied in a lot of lakes in Minnesota and Wisconsin that don't have the challenges we have. But when we're applying alum, most of that alum is not aluminum. Most of it is sulfate in water. It's just like when you go to your bath salts at home, right? The magnesium sulfate, the Epsom salts. It's part magnesium, part sulfate, and they say heptahydrate, right? That's half its weight in water. If you dried that out in an oven, it would shrink down and lose half its weight. Alum comes with anywhere from 14 to 18 molecules of water with it. So there's a lot of water weight even if you get it dry. It's just, and it adds acid and sulfur, so it's not an appropriate amendment. So we have to find a good amendment that's going to be reasonably inexpensive and try to get it dried out so that it's shippable. Connor found a mine down in Arkansas that has aluminum deposits, and they also have availability of a kiln. Now, ordinarily, these kilns are used for creating ceramics. They melt this stuff or get it close to the melting point so it can go off for fracking and for other industrial purposes. We want our aluminum dried, not fried, is what I like to say. We need it kind of cooked at about where you would put a thin pizza, so that it doesn't bind the aluminum together in basically making it a toilet bowl, right? We don't want just completely ceramic aluminum. We need it to be able to rehydrate. And these folks can do that for us and at a pretty reasonable cost. So we'd be, instead of dealing with $4.30 per pound of aluminum from an alum application and all the acids and everything else that comes with it, we could use a dried, not fried, alumina and get it for 66 cents a pound, which is really a good deal. But even as good a deal as that is, and that's the best we can find anywhere, even a pure amendment is too expensive to do capping. It is cheaper to dredge out the thick sediments that are in the old channel than it is to try to cap them and then try to maintain that cap without the phosphorus coming through.
And so to recap a little bit, when we talked about the cap, we said, I asked Greg how thick of the soils and what kind of amendment this material in the middle of them, because the thickness of the cap is a function of how much sediment is below it. And so some of these areas where we said if we could go in here and just bury that 7 foot instead of try to remove it, if we could do that for cheaper than it would take to remove it, that was the whole purpose of the exercise. What we found was that the cap was probably 3 to 4 times as expensive, at least, and quite honestly, I think everybody would feel more comfortable if you just got the sediments out of there anyway, which at the rates it's costing, it looks like it was a better deal anyway. So we did put together a cost for this based upon some of the information we learned. Go ahead, Stephanie, so the one other thing we looked at was, go ahead, one more. Yeah, so we also looked at, as I promised you, the capping got way too expensive. We didn't even put a price to it. It's in the 20s and millions of dollars. And so it wasn't worth carrying forward. The last control that we looked at, an alternative we looked at, was a whole lake amendment. If we did no dredging, and we just went in there and applied the material that Greg was talking about, per acre, and basically just dropped it down and let it set on the bottom, how thick would it have to be, in place? And so the life of this wouldn't be that long. But Greg's already reviewed some of the other things. Go ahead, one more, Stephanie. And so that was also a very expensive project, as you see, to do that. And so we're kind of back to the decisions that come as far as a recommendation between hydraulic and mechanical dredging there. Is there one more slide, Stephanie? Yeah, so I'm going to leave this up for a second. So some of those considerations we talked about are what we wanted to digest from you, get additional input from you. At this point, there's a risk that comes along with mechanical dredging. There's also the thought of what do we have to do to deal with shorelines. But with everything else that we've done today, if you asked us today what's a recommendation without hearing further input on this information, kind of leaning towards that project with the ability to install the low flow in the riser itself. So that's really the end of the material that was put together for the TM. What I wanted to point out, in addition to, as we talk about moving forward, there is a next step slide, but I'm going to talk real quick. I wanted to remind you that this is what we put together at the end of the old TM. And a lot what we've done is this preliminary design information that's inside that 3. There's still the watershed sampling, and so eventually I want to revisit this. There's still some other next steps with regards to the watershed sampling, and then talking about outside funding. Some of those things still need to start happening if you so choose to move forward in the project. So I think next one's last slide. So this was the overall project as a reminder that we're still talking about the first part of the project, internal load control. We still got to continue to work in the watershed to address the external control, but then also look at that near lake project to be implemented to get to the point where we don't have to worry about a large annual investment in the lake to make it usable. Okay, so this is from the last page of the TM in terms of next steps. If I listed, my recommendation to you for the next step is, number one, I've heard a lot of people say, we understand we got to do something, we got to figure out how to pay for it. So obviously continue to figure that out. Number one is a big step. Once you do have decide on a dredging project type, obviously it takes some time to do the final design of the permitting stage to get bid documents ready so that once a funding package is ready, you can get the project going. That's obviously, at this point not going to happen this fall. If it was to happen if you wanted it to happen next fall, getting started, sometime in the next couple months is probably a good idea. Secure the location of all the potential dredge spoil areas because it does take some work to get those ready for the project itself. And then that last slide I showed you was, to look at some of those other testing services next year to think about that, because eventually when you have to get into an external loading project, you're going to want to obviously get that external loading project done as quickly as you can after the internal loading project is done. And that's the one where developing the overall plan and starting to look for those larger external sources of money would be the goal there. This is from the old TM, so we don't need to go to that one, Stephanie. Yeah. So with that, that's the content. The last thing I wanted to mention is with regards to the permitting, we've addressed the permitting that's required. Just trying to shorten tonight's presentation. We've addressed the permitting and talked to the state about discharging both hydraulic and draining the lake to James River, et cetera. We understand the full ramifications. There's nothing that came up that was really exciting about that. Everything looks like it's able to be done quite easily. So, and that's all in that particular. So with that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
There was some thought out in the public and in the paper that the Corps of Engineers would not allow dredging. That's absolutely untrue, correct?
Well, I've been doing dredging projects my whole career, and every time you deal with a permit from the Corps of Engineers, there's mitigation things you have to do, depending on impacts. But I've never seen them disallow a project. I don't know where that came from. We're doing 4 dredging projects right now.
So do you guys have an idea where, when you take this stuff out of the lake, where you're going to put it, or how far it's going to go, or any ideas of where to put it?
So we've been given several. There have been areas pointed out to us. City obviously focused on a city-owned land first, and what we would have to do those. What has to be done as a function of mechanical versus hydraulic dredging. So that's definitely a detail, and one of the things I highlighted when we started this is I'm not going out looking for sites as part of this, just letting you know how big they need to be and what the cost ramifications are of if they're too far.
Remind us again of the difference of the hydraulic versus the mechanical as far as the size of area you're going to need.
So if we're looking at 1 million yards of consolidated sediment in a mechanical dredging project, we need to be able to stack 1 million yards. And because we're taking it to the disposal site in a fairly dry state, it's never dry, but it's moist. Like anything else, we don't want to transport water. We only need to store 1 million yards. But in hydraulic dredging, we're pumping a slurry to a big bathtub, and the bigger the bathtub is, as we pump, as the dredgers pump it full, they can use bigger pumps, and they don't have to wait for the water to drain back down. And so the bigger the bathtub is, the more they can pump without waiting for the water to return. And so they kind of expect as a minimum that you have 2 times the amount, but prefer 3. So So one of the problems is if you have a disposal site on top of the hill, you could pile dirt 15.5-foot tile on top of the hill and stabilize it and make it usable in a mechanical situation. You start talking about hydraulic dredging where you're going to build berms and pump it full of water on top of the hill, then you got challenges because you're essentially building a dam. And so there's different ramifications for each, but essentially hydraulic dredging, you need 2 to 3 times the size of the mechanical.
So you're looking at one for 40 acres and the other one at 120.
Yes, sir.
Mike, if I heard you correctly at one point, did you say that 1 million cubic yards would be half the dredging? Why would we not dredge the entire lake? Why just half?
No, what I said was that we've got about 2 million cubic yards of sediment in the lake. That's unconsolidated. So by the time it's dried, it's half. Okay, so once we get rid of the water that's, as we know, as you step in mud right now in the lake, it's, sorry, that's really loud, I apologize. I've done it twice. As you step in it, it's squishy. It doesn't weigh the same. And so that's the consolidation rate that takes us from the volume that's in the lake, the 2 million yards in the lake that we've measured with the sonar equipment. 2 million yards in the lake is 1 million yards dried. Same amount, same stuff.
Isn't half the phosphorus still there yet?
No, we're removing 100% of the soft sediments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just the storage volume outside is half.
That's mechanical.
No, that's both. That's both. You just need more area to get the hydraulic slurry stabilized because you got to pump it full of water. Sediment comes out. We bleed the cleaner water off the top, return it to the lake, and it's just a big cycle.
And you think it can all be done, like the mechanical, in a 6-month period of time?
You can do anything with,
But is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time you want to do higher volume, it costs you more. Okay, so that's pretty normal. You can do higher volume, it just costs you more. So yes, you can do it in one season. Now, I say that, and that's the season where it rains every day, through September, October, November. That your biggest problem is the risk of runoff, resaturating the soils. There's also the opportunity that you get into the frost and in the late part of the season, it's almost a little easier for them working in the lake bed, but a little tougher to stabilize the soils on the disposal site because you can't compact frost.
And I believe that I've got a brother-in-law that does this up in Wyoming, and he said it's a lot easier doing it in wintertime than it is any other time, and you can make it that way.
But then they want a bigger disposal area because you can't compact frost. So we can't get it consolidated in one season. And so temporary staging areas are another way that we can do things. And if we drain the lake in a mechanical situation, you can use the coves to help dewater as well.
Is there permits you have to get with the game fish and parks and all that?
You bet.
Is that quick process or is that hard to do?
Like anything else, nothing is quick today. The Corps of Engineers is extremely busy. I would say it fluctuates a lot just depending on what's going on right now. So we've talked to them, in terms of the water discharge rates. One of the things that takes the longest, probably, especially in a state where they don't have a lot of experience with soil amendments and water amendments, is getting the NPDES permit and the application permit to put something in the lake. And so the first time we went through that in Nebraska and Iowa, it took a while. But now that we've been through the process, everybody understands what's going on, it goes pretty quick now. So we would want to start kind of laying that groundwork at the very beginning of the project and use kind of a vertical teaming approach to make sure it didn't end up being a factor in the critical path. But I would say that would be one of the first things you start on is those conversations.
How do you handle the bay, like Kippis Bay? It's pretty long, homes on one side, mostly public land on the other side. How do you handle something like that?
Well, I mean, once you drain the lake, just bigger equipment, smaller equipment. And so, we've removed stuff with skid loaders. We've removed stuff with pretty big front end loaders.
Do you do anything with the storm sewers that all go into those bays?
So one of the things that we did find in getting up there and doing it was that there wasn't a whole lot of deposition at the end of those storm sewers. We didn't see anything that looked tremendously different than anything else in the lake. But like anything else, any point where there's water coming into the lake, the contractor has to work around whatever that is. So the storm sewers, like the main Firestone Creek, don't run a whole lot in September through November. They do a little, but you saw the kind of the percentages there. They don't run a whole lot where they're going to be a huge issue.
With catch basins above the I take it the outtake or whatever the final storm
Sure, they would. In a storm sewer situation, it's pretty rare that you got ground that you're allowed to flood ahead of the storm sewers. Usually those are designed to get water out. But one of the things we talked about was handling of waters. Even if you get a temporary, we talked about eventually doing that near lake solution where you got something of a detention cell at the headwaters of the lake. I mean, if you could you even borrow the land for a year to block that off and temporarily flood it while you got the lake project going on, you've really reduced contractor risk.
So let's assume that we're going forward this year, and November 30th, it's all cleaned up. It's wonderful. How long does it take the lake to refill?
So that's obviously a function of how much it rains the next spring, but what we've got is just the average, in an average year, here's what we can expect for runoff. But because we know that the lake turns over an average of 5 times a year throughout the year, chances are it's going to refill any spring. I mean, just using straight history and percentages. Did we do any numbers with that?
We didn't look at that in particular, but it would be about maybe 50% of the years that it may not fill completely. But when there are wet years, it often refills many times over. So it's really more if it's a wet or if it's a snowy winter or a wet spring, or if it's a dry winter.
I believe your map showed 6 times it went over this year.
Already?
Yes.
Refilled
Yes.
6 times.
And this year is a little wetter than average. I believe the average is more in the about 2 times a year would be about average.
You had indicated as far as dredging that the mouth and the end, theoretically you don't want to touch them and work in the actual lake itself. Would you also go out to the bays then also, or would you just concentrate on the interior part of the lake?
Yeah, the coves are going to be a very little effort. Connor kind of talked about how some of those went from 1 foot to 0 up there. And so they're the first things to dry out, and it's the least amount of material. So it's like, it's like shoveling the sidewalk in front of your house versus your 4-car garage driveway. It's so little, it's easy to go in and get it all. It's a low volume, and it's the easiest stuff to get because it's the highest.
I drove around the lake yesterday and looked in all. I mean, those bays have colors. I've never seen before. They're bad.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough year.
Yeah, early already.
Yeah.
Can we get a list of the permits required and the approximate amount of time?
They're in the TM.
Are they?
The time I really can't estimate, Steve. I can give you a guess, but it's a total function of how many other permits the departments deal with, and because it's sort of new, but I would say all of them are obtainable in a 1-year design process.
One year design phase?
If you started this fall, they'd be ready to go for next fall. There's no reason to suspect they wouldn't.
You say you've done numerous dredgings.
Can you give your name first, please? Come up to the speaker.
Kimberly Baker. You claim that you've done numerous dredgings, but where in South Dakota? And if so, how? Because you didn't have a permit to operate until this year.
So this is my first project in South Dakota doing a dredging project. I covered in depth the deal with the license last time. All the dredging projects we've done have been in Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa. So none in South Dakota. Nobody's done a whole lot of dredging projects in South Dakota.
Is the hydraulic option, do you draw the water down at all with hydraulics, or are you just with whatever the number or the amount of water you have in there, that's what you work with?
So that answer is a complete function of, if the lake is stable, and if you got zero inflow, then it's a capacity of the pumps that they put in place. Because we pump something full, it takes a while to bleed off and comes back, but the dredgers want to keep going. So we did drop Lake Manawa in terms of tenths by doing that. They had a very sandy disposal area, so they lost a lot of water in the recirculation. And so depending on the location of the disposal area, it's possible to lose water in the system. But it's really a function of how big are the pumps that they're using, which are a function of how big of a disposal area do we have for them to pump to. So you can lose water in a closed system, sure. And how much of a, a million yards. So if you do the math, a million yards, if we're pumping a 17, 18% slurry, that means we're pumping 6 million gallons of water total, or 6 million cubic yards, which is a lot more gallons of water. It doesn't have a huge effect on Lake Mitchell because of the size of the lake.
So there, just real quick follow-up on that.
But it's not zero.
So the pump is not designed for the hydraulic option. It is just the mechanical.
No, the pump is designed for the I'm sorry, did I say it wrong? The pump is designed for the hydraulic option. Mechanical, they don't use pumps.
But the pump next to the spillway, the drawdown.
That's not a pump. That's just a straight pipe with a valve.
Okay, but I guess my question is that designed for both options or just one?
No, it would be a different pump. Pumps that have an impeller that can turn a slurry. The ones that you see that'll draw the lake down, that's more of a water pump, a clear pump. So the dredgers have big pumps on barges.
Right. I guess ultimately my question is, can we use that drawdown mechanism in the future if we so choose, regardless of what option we go with?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, yes. Because you can build it, even if you choose to do hydraulic dredging, you can still choose to install the drawdown, because you could build that with cofferdams. You could either build it with cofferdams ahead of time, like when they did the last project, they had the cofferdams out there to create a dry area to work, or you could wait till you draw the lake down in a mechanical situation. Then you lose the ability to use the drawdown to draw the lake down.
But if you do hydraulic, you don't have to install the thing.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get. So
That's
I knew the question you were asking.
Sorry.
Yeah, mechanical is the only time we have to install that.
When you're talking about these cofferdams,
yep.
We live on
Can you come up to the microphone, please,
Oh,
Sue?
I'm sorry.
And give your name, please.
They like to hear
People want to hear what's being said. That's okay.
I'm Sue Bennett, and my question is, if you build the cofferdams, like you're talking at the ends, what does that do to our property? Does that flood? We're only so deep, so wide. What does that do to our areas?
So the cofferdams would be, are you up in like the canal area?
Mm-hmm.
So the cofferdams would be used not to raise keep the water level where it is now. So you'd actually probably come out better than anybody who was in the main part of the lake that had their lake drained. So the cofferdams would basically keep the lake up at the elevation of the existing lake, because we want to store store the water back there so that Poet can continue to take water during the
Oh, I see. Okay, okay, I was confused. Yeah. Thank you.
Basically, just a little dam to keep that part of the lake from draining.
Okay.
Then we would have to design a hydraulic, to water to come over the cofferdam and when there's runoff events, et cetera.
I'm a dead man walking, but why wouldn't the hydraulic dredging actually stir up phosphorus?
It does. The hydraulic dredging is basically like a big carp, So if you do it the right, so there's two kinds of, the most popular two kinds of heads in hydraulic dredging are, number one, a cutter head. So if you had a clean lake but you wanted additional depth, you could hire a dredger to come in there and say, we want some additional depth out here, but you're going to be chewing into the alluvium, the hard pan. They would use a cutter head, basically just a big turning well head with a lot of spikes on it to disturb everything, and use a giant pump to suck out that disturbed water. In this case, it actually wouldn't do that bad, because what they do now is when you're only removing unconsolidated targeted sediments, it's basically a shop vac. And so there's going to be a little bit, but even at Lake Manawa, where we used a cutter head to get into sand, very little increase in turbidity around the actual thing itself. For this project, we don't want to get into the hard pan. We want to leave the hard pan in place, because number one, we don't need them removed. Number two, it costs more. We just want to get the bad stuff, what I call the targeted sediments. That would be done essentially with a big vacuum cleaner. Very little increase in turbidity.
If we do the mechanical dredging with the trucks and stuff,
yes, sir.
The roads that are on the lake, they're probably not strong enough heavy enough to haul that.
We have to check roads, and so I'm sure Kyle would be aware of that. Roads, we got to check bridge weights. There's a lot of things we have to look at the route, and a lot of times what we do, Kevin, is we look for off-road routes. You have a lot of public land around, the shoreline, and Nathan and Kyle gave me those maps. Can we get somewhere without driving on roads? Because we can come in and fix a farm field a lot easier than we could, an asphalt road. So that's definitely the routes to and from. Definitely something has to be considered.
if after you would dredge the lake and treat incoming flows in future years, how long would you project before the phosphorus level is unacceptable again?
So one of the things we talked about was when we were done dredging, and let's just say, if we used hydraulic dredging, we're not going to change the P concentration very much. And someone asked a good question, Lake Committee, could we even put alum in the return water from the dredge disposal area? And one of the problems with that is that it only deposits in a very localized situation. And and then if we refilled it in spring, we got spring runoff. We know what's going to happen. Okay, we get spring runoff, we're going to get high phosphorus again. So what we hope is that it's lower than this year, and you don't have the big gully washers like we had this year. So what we've talked about is until you can get that external, the external loading project in place, is to use maintenance alum treatment that come in and they're not designed to target the sediments in the bottom. All they're designed to do is strip the water column. You're taking somewhat of a risk there in that if we go in after Labor Day, mid-June or something, that's when it stops raining here. And if we go in there and we strip the water column with alum, as long as we don't have a huge gully washer that comes in, which are rare after that point, then we're going to have an acceptable lake use until we can get that external project in place.
What's a huge gully washer? 4 inches, 5 inches of rain up the fire scale?
So you got a huge watershed, so it can rain 5 inches up there, and it might mean a trickle here. I'm talking about wholesale being able to replenish the lake. And so we showed you that graph earlier about the percentage chance of it refilling 50% and 100%. As you can see, we don't get a lot of gully washers. The chance starts going down. August, you back into it. And so what we want to do is get to the point where you've got a usable lake. Once you do this project, you got a usable lake until you can get that external project in place. That's the goal. There's going to be a risk every year with when you apply that maintenance treatment to use the lake. But if we're in mid-June and we look out at the forecast and we don't see rain coming for 2 weeks, we know that it doesn't mean it can't rain July 4th. But we know traditionally this time of the year that we're heading into right now, the rains, and whether or not the rains quit, runoff reaching here, we've got a very watershed that soaks up a lot of rain.
Say that now, then probably this week we'll get our gully washer.
Yeah, well, it's already been a heck of a year. So.
I've had a couple of guys, probably had about 8 guys at the lake ask me about, you probably heard about them throwing that stuff in that chemical, whatever they threw in the lake.
It's not a chemical, it's all natural, I heard.
Have you ever heard of that? Or have you heard?
There's dozens of those products nationwide. I mean, they're all essentially some sort of enzyme there's a lot of those products nationwide. There's a reason you haven't heard about many of them. They work in some situations, most they don't.
Okay.
So to keep the conversation moving, I guess what I would ask is that I realize you got the report today. Give it a read, and I can work with Nathan and Kyle to. I don't want to have Mayor Toomey do too much his last 2 weeks here, but I'll be happy to work with them and work with you to get a time frame. And you tell me, when you get me comments, when you want to get me comments, and I'll tell you, when we can get the deliverables finished up. But in the meantime, keep the questions coming, and whatever we can do to answer the questions as you think through those things, email me directly, email me through Nathan or Kyle or whomever, and I'll be happy to continue to answer these questions. Anything else tonight? If not, we're going to hit the road. So thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you, guys. Any more conversation on this? If not, let's move on to the discussion of the Northwest Bike Path.
While people are filing out, I'll just give a real quick update. I thought they all wanted to stay for this, but evidently it's
no.
Favorite. Sue's going to stay.
I think you lost your audience, Jeff.
Yeah. Just a real quick recap of kind of how this somewhat evolved out and it's in my ward and actually in my neighborhood. And if everybody remembers, and not everybody in the room remembers this, so that's why I'm going to do a real quick recap. But we've had some drainage issues and some problems with roads out in that area. In fact, we've had some deterioration on Ullman, and also in the cul-de-sac that I'm at, they've actually had to replace the roads just a few years after the development was put in, because as Tim McGannon would say, it was basically just saturated, because the normal flow of water is obviously traveling toward the lake. So the closer you get to the lake, the worse problems you have. And so Tim put together, as he was working through and brought projects to the council of getting, as Dan talked about, the drainage, flood drainage and storm sewers. And it picked up a lot of that water. If you remember, in the past few years, like music apartments and where the horses are at, so forth, there was a lot of times in the springtime especially, there was just standing water. And so Tim picked up a lot of that water with these plans and got it down to the lake. And then in the process of us bringing it back to council, then the question was, we're putting these storm sewers in, and we've got the bike path that ends theoretically at the golf course. There's a section right at the driving range, and the talk was, does it make sense to maybe pick up where that leaves off and then go over to where Roger Music put his new, or the very first bike path. So that was a little bit of the history of how this all came about, and the council said it probably makes some sense. The Kippis family donated the land that they accessed that went into the Lakeview Golf Course. There was land donated for us. Come in and had some concern about us removing snow, because they had indicated how far is the snow gonna fly, because we just put in very nice pine trees, and we want to make for sure that those aren't obviously disturbed, or do we have a problem or an issue. So I don't know if you rest of you guys remember that conversation. So I do know that snow removal was part of a conversation of what we're going to do, and we'll work with you and so forth. So that was a few years past, and now we sit here today, and I just wanted everybody to kind of be aware of that, so that, like I said, probably half of us in that room remember it, and the other half are new to this. So I just thought to give a little bit of history with that. So then the final thing is the letters got sent out to them in November or February, and then that's where we kind of regrouped and did some analysis of what was actually we had easements for, what we had others, and then at that point in time, it indicated that we will come back and have this discussion and see what everybody wants to do. But I just thought I'd bring that up. Hopefully you guys have the same recollection.
I remember it.
That's what I'm going to try to run through quickly with you, is what we ended up finding is for easements and easement agreements and things like that up in this area. So I'm going to start over here by I lost my mouse. I'm going to start over by Innovative Systems here, and this would be Minnesota. You can see as the bike path comes north on Minnesota, that's all still in the public right-of-way up until the intersection with 23rd. At that point, the easement does run on, or the bike path does run on private property through the rest of that stretch on West 23rd, all the way over to near the intersection with Ullman over there.
Justin, is that bike path all 8 foot wide, or most of it?
I believe the parts that are paved are. I don't know about the gravel. You can see right here it changes from asphalt to gravel. The rest of this to the west is unpaved. As you start over at Innovative Systems, the plats for this area, they do show an easement, and the bike path would be located in that. The problem is that none of these locations actually have an easement agreement saying who's responsible for what. So the easement is there, you just don't know who has to take care of what. So And that's true for that whole stretch from Innovative up until you get to the church. The church actually does have an easement agreement, if I'm remembering correctly. However, it does not specifically say who's responsible for snow removal. And then it goes back to no easement agreement for the rest of this over here. And the far west lot is actually the city drainage pond. So that would be our responsibility no matter what. As you come back towards Innovative System, I hate to call it official bike path route, but if you look at the map, the way it's posted on the city website, the bike path cuts up north along the cemetery through this area and then connects over here and runs up around the golf course. All the way up to the driveway entrance up here to get into the golf course. You've got a couple of areas to the south here where it's not officially bike path, but there is sidewalk on private property through this Chalkstone development. And this is very similar to the Innovative Systems and Vantage Point area where the plats show the easement, but there's no easement agreement that says who's responsible for what. And then we've got one lot here that doesn't have a plat that shows an easement and has no easement agreement. So this one's completely up in the air. As you go north from that point, it cuts back out into the right-of-way for quite a ways. So none of those areas have easement agreements, nor would they need them because they're all in the public right-of-way. So once you get to the north of this little bay, you come across two lots here where there is no easement agreement, but actually the bike path does remain in the right-of-way. It looks pretty close on here, but they actually went out and measured it, and it's all within the public right-of-way. And then it starts to cut back onto private land at this location, which would be the large music development. I'll zoom out a little bit, and you can kind of see what that all encompasses. And it would actually include those there too. But you can see that that large stretch would all be that music development up there. That area does have an easement agreement, and that says that the city shall be responsible for snow and ice removal until there's a residence developed on those lots. And at that point, it would become the lot owner's responsibility for snow and ice removal. And then we have these lots up here at the top. I think it's actually just this one. That one does have sidewalk on private property. It does have an easement agreement, and it does say that the city is responsible for snow and ice removal there. And that pretty much covers the entire area that we had to go back and double check things on. So that's where I'll start to be quiet and let people ask questions if there are any.
We've been doing this in the past, all the snow removal, Nathan?
That's correct.
And why don't we continue it?
We can. It's up to council. Yeah.
I think the point is that if the council wants to give direction to do so, then I think you just have to create that authority so that we're not just randomly going on to areas where there isn't the agreement in place for the city to do it.
So are we going to nitpick every ordinance in the city here to say, let's go ahead and do this, do this, do this? Or are we just, I think this is nitpicky. If we've been doing it in the past, let's continue it and move on.
I think if we've been doing it too, keep doing it. I mean, why change it?
It's not out of the ordinary for parks departments to actually do bike trails. So I mean, it's something that you can consider as well. As
you don't think they should do bike trails?
No, they generally do do snow removal on bike trails throughout the city. That would include Cabela's and also around DWU at this point.
Which we currently aren't doing.
Those areas we don't currently do.
I think what created the problem is, you know, sort of a handshake agreement. We had this problem with the schools over L.B. Williams, where Dr. Christensen, the superintendent of schools, and Dr. Beto, the president of Dakota Wesleyan, had an understanding, and then, of course, both those gentlemen moved on to other jobs and opportunities, and that understanding was lost. So I think part of the resentment is people maybe 20, 30 years ago had an understanding, and it was never written down. And when we discovered there was no written understanding, then, you know, the letters went out. But I would agree that I don't see any reason to change practice. I understand why the letters went out, but I think we should stick with the status quo and continue to clean them.
And actually, council asked that this area come back for discussion so you could consider exempting it when you did Burr. So that's why we brought it back, just to get clear direction, because there wasn't formal action from the council at that time, because we were waiting to hear, you know, what the results of all the easement agreements were.
So I guess, Justin, what do you see as a step? I'm sensing and hearing that the council would like to see all of these properties either that don't have an easement or do, but doesn't say who's responsible, that the council would say that the city is going to do the snow removal for those. So do we get a list of those and have a motion and a vote, or how is that formally done?
Yeah, I don't know that I've got an answer that you're going to like, but it's back to what does the ordinance say? So you've got to come up with some language that's going to work for the ordinance.
So we just make the list and exempt them. Is that a solution?
It might be as good a one as we have.
Was there 14 properties involved with that? I think there was, wasn't there?
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
I think that's the question Steve's asking. Why can't there just be an ordinance and approving those 14 properties be included in the total snow removal and
then move on? Yeah. I'm trying to find what's a way forward, knowing, or at least my interpretation of kind of what the council's feeling on this. I mean, it's existed for almost 20 years in some extent, and now there's never been a question, and now there's a question. So how do we?
Well, that's because I think there was, like I say, there's 14 properties, right. And
so
we found three easement agreements. I think, wasn't that correct, Justin? 3 easement agreements.
Right.
So we got 3. There's 14 properties. There's 11 that didn't have an easement agreement. So either we make it standard for all 14 and continue the way we had before, and that would take a council action to do that.
Yeah, and
that's fair.
Let's do it then.
Yeah, and again, I live out in that ward, and I guess I have never heard anybody complain that they see city equipment on the bike paths. So I'm thinking they're just assuming that that was part of the deal to begin with. So I don't think we're doing anything different that the citizens already thought that was probably in place. So now we just got to get the ordinance to match up with what we're currently doing and what we've actually relayed to the homeowners that had homes at the time that we did the new ones that are building. They was probably new to them of exactly what the arrangement was, but I would personally like to see go forward just and remain exactly what we're doing, and then have Justin work on bringing it back to us of this is what we could accomplish. And I guess exemption sounds about as good as any, because if we try to go out and start working on easements now, and that was probably what direction you were thinking of going, that probably would get a little messy and a little long.
Councilman Jeff, could I
sure.
make a comment here? One of the things that we're looking at, if any long-term trails that we do, what direction does the council want to go with those bike trails if we put in additional bike trails down the road here?
I think that there's a lot to do with, are you strictly in a residential area, or is there a combination of, like Cabela's came to us and said, we want bike paths around here, so will you help us design it? and we'll maintain it. Well, that was our answer there. So we don't do that one, or Dakota Wesleyan, I believe. You know, but there's other areas where we do want to hook up, and we want to make for sure all our bike paths are fluent, and so there's going to be different areas. I think we're probably just going to have to look at individually. So I don't know if you can get just a stroke across to get it understood, or if you have to look at each one. But I guess that's just my personal opinion. Whatever you guys think.
Well, any additional ones, I think it'd be case by case, and what we got now, we got. But if it depends on where it's at. So we don't know. Are you going to build some next year? Or?
Well, we're getting the trail committee back together this year, and it could be a year or two down the road.
Good.
But with one of the ultimate goals, eventually having connection between bike paths throughout
There will
town.
be new ones added as we move forward.
Good. One solution going forward is simply grandfather. Say, you know, any bike path constructed before such and such a date, the city has responsibility for it. But if I'm a landowner, can I say I don't want a bike path across my property? Or can you make me put it in and then make me maintain it?
Well, I guess the short answer to that is yes. You can condemn the land, you can put a bike path there, and then per the ordinance, you'd be responsible for adjacent sidewalk. If you take the ordinance for, you know, the word as it's written.
Nathan, you said, I mean, on a quick percentage basis, what do we take care of the bike paths? 95% of them, probably. How large?
All of them except for just around Cabela's and DW, yeah. And so if there's any connecting, I take that back. Along Minnesota there, I think there's a little bit of stretch.
I was just trying to think of something simple like, you know, any bike path,
in the
designated
residential.
bike path
I was
the
gonna
city
say-
will maintain. You know, then maybe with the exception of the Cabela's and Dakota Wesleyan area, go that way instead of trying to encompass something the other way. I don't know if that's even possible.
I mean, if you wanted the most uniform, you'd just say that the city's going to take care of any 8-foot bike path. You know, and that's going to be the simplest, most defensible solution, but that leaves us cleaning more sidewalk, obviously.
You keep saying sidewalk, and to me, there's a difference between sidewalk and bike path. Now, maybe legally there's no difference, but you know, if you put a bike path in front of my house, to me that's a bike path, and that's somebody else's job, unless it's actually a sidewalk that bikes. You know, I got bikes on my sidewalk all the time. It's not a bike path. Is there a difference in the law between a bike path and a sidewalk?
I guess it wouldn't really differentiate between the two unless you wanted to, by ordinance, make that distinction.
Aren't
You know,
some of
and
these
you
used
can
for the
do
same
that.
purpose for bike and for pedestrian?
Right, it's considered a
Dual
multi-purpose.
purpose, aren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
So if you want to make that distinction in our local code, we can certainly do that. If you want to consider anything that's over, I think 5 foot is the standard bike or standard sidewalk, anything over 5 feet is going to be considered a bike path, and say that the city is responsible for all bike paths. You know, that's a simple, easy solution. It's going to have uniform applicability. It's not going to treat different people differently just for the sake of pinpointing an area. It's going to be something that's equally applied.
Why wouldn't we take that in the case of designated bike paths? Because the fact that there is actually a sidewalk that's 6 feet wide, I don't want that to be classified as a bike path. I want to be designated by the city or the park department as a bike path. Then that's what we maintain,
That'd be
with the
8
exception
foot
of
wide.
Cabela's and Dakota Wesleyan, which are two entities that would have no problem saying we'll still maintain them. I promise you that.
That would be the 8 foot wide paths.
Correct.
Not to throw a wrench in your discussion, but if you're trying to get to uniformity, I don't think that that's going to address the exemption you already did on Burr. Of course, that's sidewalks, because we had the bike path and the sidewalks that you exempted. So maybe these are two separate conversations that you're just talking about Burr and then everywhere.
If we're going back to Burr Street, it would address the west side of Burr. It would not address the east side of Burr.
The west side's where the bike path is. Yeah.
Right.
Kevin, you got something to say?
There's kind of a little distinction between sidewalks and bike paths, but When these were built by Public Works, we were asked to take care of them for 15 to 17 years over that time. And a lot of times, being bike path, we didn't have to clear the snow all the time. But now as the houses are developed out through there and families and kids, I would say 80 to 85% of the traffic is foot traffic. So they're more of a sidewalk than they are bike trails. We see maybe, well, like I say, in a day you're lucky to see 2 or 3 bikes, but you might see 50 to 100 people walking. That's become very popular along that road.
Well, when they were put in, it was called a bike path.
It was yes, installed as a bike path.
We do not do snow removal on the unpaved, the gravel. We just do it on the paved.
Right. Yeah, every day I would drive to work, and I'd drive down 7th Street, and there'd be the same gal walking in the street. Perfectly good sidewalk. It's one of my pet peeves. But we're not going to redesignate the road a sidewalk just because she chooses to walk in the road.
I can also add in the budget, we're asking for a second piece of snow removal equipment because we only have one for sidewalks. And we actually broke down this year for a couple of days. Nobody complained, they didn't notice, but we weren't doing snow removal because we didn't have any more equipment. So we'll technically be able to do twice as much with a second piece of equipment if we get that approved in our budget.
Well, I basically asked to put this on to get the conversation started, and it looks like we got it going. So maybe if it makes sense to come with a total brush to go across instead of individually, you know, that maybe that's the way to do it, or the size or whatever. But you guys want to start thinking about that, and then just bring us back a couple options, and we'll have to then see what everybody would like to do. But I think we gave them till September, so we've got a few months here that we can try to get this resolved. So I don't know what else to say or do, but you guys okay with it?
So what I'm hearing is either an amendment to the ordinance that would exempt the additional properties discussed tonight, or some kind of a standard that would say bike paths would be by the city, except for the ones that are by Avera and DWU, which would mean all future bike paths the city would do. Is that what I'm hearing? And then you guys could discuss those 2 options? Okay.
You'd grandfather in the existing then?
Well, you would basically exempt DWU and Cabela's, but say all other bike paths over a certain width the city maintains, which means future bike paths the city would maintain as one discussion item. The other discussion is bringing those ones that you just went through by the north end of the lake here and listing those as exemptions from homeowners being responsible.
How about the ones by MTI? You get 3 sites of MTI.
Well, yeah, that MTI too. Well, everywhere else where they are. I think you'd have to go through that whole list.
Yeah, because I look at it like Mel said, in the future when we put more bike paths in, you know, I mean, we need to maintain them. I just, you know, I mean, as the future councils go down the road and they want to put them in, you got to know the fact that we're putting these in with the thought that we are also going to maintain them and take care of all the snow removal when they put them in. So if you don't wish to do that, then don't put them in that area or whatever it may be. But I just think that's something the park board down the road in the future needs to be part of it. So I'd like to have that ordinance, you know, word it that way for current and future bike paths get taken care of by the city.
And the reason why cities usually maintain them for snow removal is because we can do it a lot quicker. We don't have the 48 hours where someone's that's trying to get around town, you know, maybe the homeowner maybe waited a day or 2, so they had to go around that area, but we would be going through and getting them done.
But it is only June, so you would have all of July and August to discuss your options and make changes and still have that in place. Hopefully we're not getting snow in September.
Yeah.
We are, we're in trouble.
Okay, if there's no more discussion, let's move on to action to approve resolution R 2018-31 a resolution authorizing an application for financial assistance, authorizing the execution and submittal of the application, and designating an authorized representative to certify and sign payment request.
If it's okay with council, I'll kind of speak in general terms to both item number 17 and 18 because they are very similar and they're both for the same project. This would be for the remainder of Sanborn. So not only what would be constructed in 2019, but also what would be proposed to complete the project in 2020. So it's phase 2 and 3. So when you're looking at the total cost, that's why it's higher. The reason for that is then you're only making the application for funding one time and then we draw it down as we need it. The reason why there's 2 separate applications is one is going to the drinking water funding program and one is going to the clean water funding program. The one that goes to the drinking water would be doing your water improvements and the clean water doing the other 2 or the other half of that project. I think I covered the majority of it. This application timeframes, we're doing this one now so that we can hopefully have that approved and in place by the time we need to go to bid for North Sanborn. In the future, if the council decides to continue with the other project that we discussed at the last work session, which is the Clockworks TIF area, we'd be submitting a similar resolution for financial application for that project separately. But we wanted to get this one going knowing that phase 2 is going to happen, so we would like to get that funding application approved as soon as possible.
Move to approve resolution R 2018-31.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is the action to approve resolution number 2018-32, a resolution authorizing an application for financial assistance, authorizing the execution and submittal of the application, and designating an authorized representative to certify and sign payment request.
Move to approve 218-32.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And the last thing on the agenda is motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.
Hi, sorry to bother you. Did they approve me? Because I swear they went by it so fast I missed it. I didn't have to sit through that whole water thing. My God.
About an hour and a half ago.
Oh my God. I don't know. I mean, they must have just done that, all approved, blah, and boom. And right. No, I thought I was paying attention, but I swear.